Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. After 34 years, this was the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the UAE, a country that has a substantial Indian population and is one of India's largest trading partners.
Despite India's critical linkages with all the countries of the Gulf, the choice of UAE for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first visit to a Gulf country had been carefully thought through. While Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have been among the largest suppliers of crude oil to the energy-hungry Indian economy, the UAE has been India's key partner for non-oil trade, with bilateral trade in excess of $59 billion. Besides, Indians in the UAE are the largest remitters of funds back home, amounting to over $15 billion. And the UAE is home to a 2.5 million strong Indian population, making them one-third of its entire populace. The sheer numbers of Indians in the UAE were evident at the 50,000-seat Dubai Cricket Stadium, which was packed to the brim for Modi's speech. As the Prime Minister announced UAE's commitment to investing $75 billion or nearly 5 lakh crore rupees in India. These investments, especially in the Indian power sector, would be critical for the Indian economy. But what surprised many observers was the joint statement. Clearly, Mr. Modi had exploited the recent breach between Pakistan and the Gulf countries over Islamabad's refusal to actively join the Yemen war against the Houthi fighters. Modi's veiled references to Pakistan were not lost on anyone. The joint statement had many indirect references to Pakistan, such as giving a religious color to political disputes, which Pakistan does with the use of jihadi groups. The need to dismantle the infrastructure of terrorism like that on Pakistani soil, to bring perpetrators of terrorism like Zakiur Rahman Lakhvi to justice, and to disrupt the alliance between money laundering, criminals and extremists like in the case of Dawood Ibrahim. Most importantly, in proclaiming a natural strategic partnership with the UAE and putting security cooperation, including counter-terrorism, at the center of it, Prime Minister Modi has seized a rare moment of change in the Gulf and launched a new phase in India's relations with a very critical region.
Clearly, one of the major takeaways of Mr. Modi's visit to the UAE was this new cooperation that India and Abu Dhabi have agreed to counter terror, and India is clearly poised now to play an important role in the strategic discourse of that region, to look at issues related with the UAE and the Arab world in general. We have two experts with us, Mr. Pinak Chakravarti, who's retired as Secretary Economic Relations of the MEA and has held several diplomatic assignments in the Arab world, is a fluent Arabic speaker as well, and the one and only Dr. C. Raja Mohan, author, analyst, commentator, and currently a senior distinguished fellow at the ORF Foundation. Dr. Raja, you have mentioned in one of your recent writings that the real long-term implications of Mr. Modi's new relationship that he's been able to forge with the UAE is this whole security dialogue and the security initiative, and in some ways you suggest that India could take the place of the British Raj in the Gulf countries. Elaborate on that.
I think generally independent India has been hesitant to do security with the Gulf countries. What's happened is, because while we had a long tradition, the British Raj was responsible for security of much of this region, but independent India tended to pull away from that role. In the last few years, in fact, there is growing demand from the region that because of their concerns, the turmoil that is going on in the region, and the power shift in the region, that they're looking to diversify their security relationships beyond the traditional dependence on the United States. So I think there is a place for India, there is a niche for India to expand its security cooperation. What Mr. Modi has done is, if you look at the 32 action points in the joint statement, nearly half of them relate to security, one form or another. So I think finally you have Delhi beginning to respond to the demand for security cooperation from the Gulf, and I think that's an important step forward.
Mr. Chakravarti, taking on this joint statement that really has come out from the meeting between Mr. Modi and the leadership in the UAE, to me there are two very, very important aspects. One is that the security relationship that has been forged. But I'd like you to throw a little more light on how India has suddenly taken the space which would normally have been given by the UAE to Pakistan. They have been long-standing supporters of Pakistan. The Pakistanis were perhaps the first country to recognize the UAE in 1971. And if you remember the IC-814 hijacking also, the aircraft landed in the UAE before it turned around and landed in Kandahar. Dawood has had links with people in the UAE. A lot of other Pakistanis do trade with India via the UAE. So where do you see now this relationship going between India and the UAE in strategic terms, in counterterrorism, and the UAE and Pakistan?
You're absolutely right, because in the beginning, in the first few decades of their independence, I think the Islamic pull factor worked a lot, and Pakistan took advantage of it. Pakistan, in fact, flew their Air Force, trained their pilots. So Pakistan was deeply embedded into their defense services in terms of training, and because they had shared American equipment for them. Now, what has happened over the years is that Pakistan's general, tendency to go into jihadi and other kinds of things, this has upset some of the Arab countries who were traditional partners of Pakistan. And moreover, during the Yemen civil war, Pakistan was requested, because of these long-standing defense ties, to come and contribute to troops on the ground. Now, Pakistan, as you know, refused. I think that created a certain red flag in the minds of these countries, that Pakistan can no longer be relied upon to help them when in their hour of need, as they saw it. Now, what has happened is that India has over the years maintained a low-key presence in the sense of sending their ships for port calls, etc. And I remember when I was there as a diplomat, we used to receive Indian ships, but then it was just showing the flag. That's about it. But then slowly it has moved into training, and now I think they are giving us a very strong signal that they would like India to take on much more in the security domain than before. I think the joint statement is a testimony to that.
We have traditionally been involved for several years now in anti-piracy operations. We have our own security interests linked to that region. An argument that I have made sometimes to say that if your energy security is a very important pillar of your national security, and bulk of your, 45% to 50% or even more of your energy requirements come from the Gulf countries. So obviously you have to be involved in the whole exercise. So therefore a larger maritime presence, a larger presence in terms of assisting the Gulf countries, where Pakistan is now going to drag its feet for its own reasons following the April resolution of the Pakistani parliament and the Yemen crisis. So where do you see it all going?
So I think, in terms of general terms, the understanding in the last 20 years that, look, our energy requirements have gone, so energy security considerations have grown, the maritime considerations have dramatically grown. But I think the problem was the previous governments in Delhi tended to be ambivalent. Look, should we get drawn into the Gulf or not? Should we be careful? Should we get caught between, the competing rivalries within the region? And should we stick to a traditional policy of, staying, hands-off approach and limited to economics? I think what this government seems to have decided that, look, they're looking for cooperation. They're not asking us to choose sides. That this actually opens the door for us to simultaneously engage almost all the actors in the region. Partly for the smaller kingdoms, that we can do more assistance, more training, more cooperation, those kind of things where we can fill an important gap without having to be sucked into the regional conflict.
The UAE was a well thought out choice for Mr. Modi's first visit to the Gulf countries. There are issues of relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. There are issues that the two big heavyweights in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia and Iran, are both at daggers drawn against each other, if I can use the term. There is also the support that some of these countries have been lending to groups which are irregulars and unconventional warfare, resulting as a result of that. So therefore, it was a good choice. What, to your mind, was the message that would have gone out to other countries in the Gulf, as well as what do you think, other than security, would have been a major motivator for this relationship to move forward?
I think there are a few factors why this UAE was chosen. Number one, the long-standing relationship and the fact that 2.6 million Indians work there, almost 30% of the population. And the fact that they rely on Indians to run their country. And so it is logical for them sometimes, because it is only our reluctance that has forced them to turn elsewhere in terms for their security needs. But now that era, I think, is over. So they are asking us, please join us in our security sort of domain as well to help us. Now, investments would be a major factor because, as you know, they sit on large sovereign funds, most of these countries, oil-rich countries. UAE has promised, I think, in the joint statement to set up a joint investment fund, and up to $75 billion can be invested. But I must put in a caveat here that we must make it possible for them to invest, because our own investment regime, etc., has to be cleaned up. Because I don't think the sovereign wealth funds, those who manage the wealth funds, are interested in navigating the Indian bureaucracy, which they will immediately, find it very difficult to do. So those are some of the reasons why and last reason, if I may say so, is the moderate nature of the ruling establishment there. They are not, they are not into promoting Wahhabism. They're not into promoting any other religious kind of they don't have a religious agenda, so to speak. They are basically interested in business, stability, and after all, they have emerged because of these reasons as India's second largest trading partner.
Interesting answers. There's a lot of merit in this relationship, and it can clearly move forward if both sides keep their part of the bargain. We are looking at Mr. Modi's visit to the UAE and the various positive signals that has come out of this extremely important visit by the Prime Minister. Raja, it's all very well to talk about a strategic partnership. It's all very well to talk about their investment in the defense industry in India and in various other strategically important areas, whether it's cyber security, whether it's looking at other technologies that India needs, even renewable energy. These are all very, very important initiatives. But clearly, is India going to be able to live up to the promise that India needs to fulfill to get to where Mr. Modi wishes for India to be? There is a $75 billion sovereign investment commitment. How is it going to pan out into the Indian market?
Look, for example, on the investment, as Ambassador Pinaki Chakravarti pointed out, look, we have to make it happen.
Right.
Because actually the whole world wants to come in. And in fact, the problem has been the nature of our investment environment or regulations, etc. So changing that is going to be the big challenge. And I think the Emiratis have had a problem with India because some of their investments in the past got into trouble, for example, on the 2G, etc. And they found it was very difficult to get redress. The complexity of India's political and economic decision-making caught them off the guard. So I think some reassurance on that becomes important. Second, I think the government seems to have promised, as in the case of Japan, we're going to set up a separate fast track that will help them and do some hand-holding for the UAE investors to come in. So I think that's quite clearly, it fits in with Mr. Modi's agenda of accelerating investments into infrastructure, but still the policy challenges remain. On the security side, I think there is, as I said, the problems on the bureaucratic side, that we've generally been averse to defense diplomacy, averse to doing things abroad. But I think the scale of Mr. Modi's ambition, his importance of, that we need to take our role in this region, that is politically set a new driver to the system. My sense is, while the system might not respond 100%, certainly they'll begin to respond and we will see some results. For example, interoperability was mentioned. Can our Navy work more with the systems? Because there is going to be some common equipment between their Air Force and our Air Force. Can we help them build their nuclear industry? All these are possibilities, because in India that looks outwards can actually find a whole lot of things that the services, military, economic, and others that India can provide for the Emiratis.
3 or 4 points come to my mind. One is about 60% or more of India's energy requirements come from there. How can we ensure that this continues to be free-flowing? Is it going to be working in the long term towards our benefit? Energy prices have begun to fall. They could fall further once Iran comes on to the global family, as it were, of exporters of energy. The second aspect is the Arab countries are looking to invest in India, but we need investments in areas outside of energy. I mean, power sector is certainly hungry for investment, but there's the railways, there is infrastructure investment. And as Raja has brought out, that we need to get our act together. So what would be your short and crisp solution to our policy makers, that what do we really need to address to make sure the funds keep flowing in?
It would be best for India to actually clean up its own act first, and then prepare a product or several products for them to invest. And it can be joint investments, it can be a consortium approach, anything. They are quite flexible. But as long as they find that this is an attractive investment, and will give them a fixed rate of return. I think they want a very simple kind of a procedure and want a fixed rate of return. Can we do it? That is our challenge. Number two, on the defense side, the transport sector, what Raja just mentioned, the transport sector, there are commonalities of aircraft now, because we have invested so much in American aircraft, the C-130s and the C-17s, and they are all equipped, and most of their equipment is either American or French. And we have that commonality today. And I think that is an area where we can actually exchange training, we can exchange repair and maintenance, and that kind of thing. So that's the beginning, I think, that we should make in these two areas.
We already have a lot of exercises and cooperations happening with various Gulf countries. There's a number of exercises that take place with the Omanis. There has been sort of fly-in, fly-out visits with some of the other countries. There's maritime exercises. There is a joint anti-piracy operation. So what is really, to your mind, the serious next steps that need to be taken to make the most of the joint statement, particularly in confronting terrorism?
Look, I think the joint statement identifies some aspects. For example, intelligence exchanges, greater cooperation between the law enforcement agencies, more training, for example, between the police forces. So I think all these have been identified. I mean, I think on the law enforcement side and counterterrorism, and in fact, there was a whole reference to, drugs, money laundering. So the sky is the limit, actually. Because of our hesitations, we've held back. But today, on the law enforcement and the counterterrorism side, a huge number of things, I think, which are waiting to be done. And unlike in the defense side, it's much easier to start working on these issues.
Right. Mr. Chakravarti, last question to you. There's a large Indian population in the Arab world. You've served in many of those countries, 2.6 million in UAE, but if you add it all up, it runs into several millions. We congratulated ourselves for the speedy evacuation for some 4,000 odd Indians from Yemen. But if there is really a major crisis in the Arab world, how do you think we are going to be able to handle the influx of that many Indians back in India and the negative impact of that on our economy, because they remit a huge amount of funds into India? Your views?
Well, that is the reason why we should be more engaged in this on the security domain, because we don't want that kind of a situation to arise. Because it is a no-brainer that if that kind of a situation arises, it will impact hugely on India, not only bringing all our citizens back, but also on our economy. The remittances, the trade, everything will be affected. So it is in our long-term interest to make sure that that kind of a thing does not happen, and we contribute to peace, stability, and the economic well-being of that region, because that ultimately gives us the benefits of those economic growth, etc. And as we grow, we need the energy that also comes from this region. Hence, we have to keep the sea lanes of communication open so that our energy flows are not interdicted by anybody, or it is not interrupted. which can happen if there is instability and if there is political instability or other kind of instability.
Very interesting answers, as always. Quite clearly, India has to get more involved in the security discourse in the Gulf countries. And as the joint statement has reflected, a great deal of attention is being paid to the security arrangements that India can help with the Gulf countries. This is part of India's strategic past, and India should now become a more active player in the balance of power and in the military discourse in the Gulf countries. Equally important is India's energy security, bulk of which comes from the energy supplies in the Gulf countries, and India has to be clearly more focused in ensuring that our energy supplies remain uninterrupted from the Gulf countries, particularly from choke points like the Gulf of Hormuz. Equally important is that India must now, to allow Mr. Modi's vision to move forward, create a climate for efficient investment and allow these investments to reach very quickly to the sectors where they are required, whether it's in the industry or in the space of defense, cybersecurity, and in the larger area of investments in infrastructure in India. And finally, India has in the past been too hesitant to become a key player in the Gulf for wanting to ensure that it doesn't have too large a footprint there. But with a growing Indian population, with a great deal of dependencies in Indian people here for remittances that come in by that population, and there is a desire in the Gulf countries to involve more in the discourse in the region, India has to step up and punch in its weight category and become a more important player in the region. Thank you very much, sirs, for your answers. We'll be back next week with another episode of Latitude. Until then, goodbye.